What's up, everyone? My name is Wes, and you're listening to the Ear Coffee Podcast. For today's episode, I got to chat with OKnice. The St. Paul rapper recently released his new album, Have You Tried Being Happy? An honest, heartfelt, and self-effacing deep dive into his struggles and his persistence through it all. We talked about his lyrical inspirations, coping with humor, the album's different collaborations, and a whole lot more. Without further ado, here's my interview with OKnice on the Ear Coffee Podcast. How are you doing on this remarkably sunny March morning?
I'm good. I'll kick off by talking about the weather, like a good Minnesotan. Excited for it to get warm.
Yeah.
But thanks for having me.
Yeah, very glad to have you. So just to kind of dive right in, I always like starting interviews in the same way, because I found just over time and just talking to musicians, being friends with musicians, pretty much anyone who puts themselves out there and makes music or art in some capacity has had a very personal relationship with music or art for a really long time, and just it's influenced a lot of their lives. So I'm curious, what was your connection with music as you were growing up, first kind of discovering what you ended up liking and what your influences, interests were, and we'll kind of continue on to that, just leading up to when you actually started writing and performing. But just what were some of those first formative experiences like, and share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So both my parents were really, really like big music listeners. My dad did like choir singing. But they're both big music listeners. A lot of Prince, a lot of Michael Jackson. Mm-hmm. My dad was a big Run DMC fan, a big like disco fan. And so that was like a lot of heavy like early listening. My mom, big Janis Joplin fan. So that was kind of that culmination early on. One of my first tapes, the first tape was Run DMC, but one of the first tapes my granny gave me was George Strait, Pure Country. So that introduced me to like love songs. Yeah, those were those early years. My dad gave me a Run DMC tape though, which was like my first like in hand tape, followed by a MC Hammer's "Hammer Don't Hurt 'Em" was the second one. Yeah, it's that was like early like shaping me up for like rap and hip hop.
Yeah. As you were growing up, and I guess furthering your relationship and your love of at least hip hop, if not George Strait and other country love songs, when did you first kind of start realizing that you maybe wanted to perform, I guess, in any capacity, if not specifically write your own rhymes, write your own lyrics, and start creating hip hop specifically? Like, what led you down that path beyond just enjoying your Run DMC tapes and just being a music listener?
Yeah. When I was a kid, I really wanted to be a radio host. So like, okay. I'd run a little imaginary radio thing. This
is kind of close. We got the mic in front of you.
This is what I've always wanted, and so like that got me to enjoy like, I don't know, doing recording things for other people and like for entertainment and things like that. But then the first like big time I wanted to do anything was in middle school. I was at a friend's house, and his older brother was in a rap group. And they were all just like freestyling, and I like liked rap, and I listened to rap, had no thought to like try it. I was just really like sucked in by them doing it. And I decided I wanted to join in, and it was awful. Like these high school kids just bullied this middle school kid for his terrible freestyles.
Oh,
but
no.
like, that was the like tipping point, because I was bad enough that I wanted to get good at it.
Yeah, like you're kind of like your Charlie Parker moment where like somebody throws the cymbal at your head, you're like, okay, I need to get better.
It was. I mean, it really was. It was, a very anti-bullying, but in this case, it was enough to say, you know what? No, I think I can get better at this. And one of the guys in that group went on to kind of coach me over the years and teach me a lot about hip hop and rap. And so I was really fortunate for that too. So I wasn't just like some kid in the sticks trying to learn on his own.
Yeah, talk about that mentor. Who was that? Are you still working with them today? Are they on any of your other releases, or has it been more of kind of just a specifically mentor position?
Yeah, that was my guy Alonzo. He went by Glass Eye, and he gave me, my introduction to almost every lane of hip hop. Gave me 50 Cent's "Get Rich or Die Trying" when it came out. Gave me like my stack of like Def Jux CDs, so like LP,
okay. Yep.
Cannibal Ox, and those. And yeah, he just like we this is in 2000. 2005, 2006. And so, like home recording was possible, but it wasn't great. And it took a lot of work to set up, but we'd kind of done some writing together, a lot of freestyling together. But then he passed away in 2006. And so unfortunately we never got to like do much together, but in those few years he like just imparted so much knowledge and really pushed home things like, don't talk about anything you don't know about. And like, especially as like a white dude, respecting like the history and making sure that was a part of like my thinking with it, of like, know what you're stepping into before trying to just take up some space.
Yeah. Just adding like that layer of kind of just context to everything you're doing and being considerate.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always amazing just at how just like something as simple as like giving somebody like a CD can just totally change their lives. And I was having heard that, and also just speaking from personal experience, just like that's always so rad when you have someone who even just does something as simple as like, hey, check this out. I got this CD or this tape for you.
Yeah, I mean, especially, still to this day, but especially pre-streaming, where like you didn't stumble upon anything,
No, not really.
Maybe on LimeWire, like something would get grouped in, but like
Reddit, if you were one of those people.
Yeah. And even today in music streaming though, right? Like I think it's still rare for me to like stumble upon something that really hits or that I really sit with. Somebody gives you a physical thing, you have to sit with it and you have to listen to it.
Yeah. Or like, even if it's just like a scratch to hell copy of Tool's Enema. It's like, well, this is only, you bought this for me and it was only $1, so now I owe it to you to at least listen to this.
Yeah.
Like, it creates that bond.
Yeah.
Awesome. So just kind of, I guess, we have a little bit of time to cover and fast forwarding, but as leading up to kind of your first couple of releases, at least the ones I could find online, the earliest ones were back in 2018. So did you have a long period of either just kind of freestyling and just enjoying rap without really worrying about recording or like releasing music, or was it under a different name? Like, what was your creative process when you were before you started releasing music as OKnice? Because sounds like you had a long time spent just either creating music or at least engaging with it. So let's kind of fill in that gap. Let's talk a little bit about that.
It's a pretty big gap. In 2006, 2007, 2008, was a lot of like one-off songs under a different name that I actually at this point don't even remember what the name would have been. But little things like that, because I met some guys in college who rapped and like were into weird stuff. That's why I got in like MF Doom and the Cool Kids, and so like that was a whole like the next evolution and but nothing serious. A lot of freestyle battles. I always joke about how like at that age, like 17, 18, I had a way too big ego, and nothing feeds an ego like winning a freestyle rap battle. So that was like the main focus, and then I just kind of fell out of it. Had my really cliche origin story, got in some trouble. Needed to like turn things around, and then I moved to Minnesota, stopped music altogether to try and just like focus on not being a dirtbag. And in that time, I got into spoken word in the cities and like slam poetry and all of the things that we can make fun of with slam poetry. Like I was each one of those. A lot of chambray shirts. But that was kind of my introduction to the Twin Cities like writing scene, which was also tied to its hip hop scene. So I couldn't even get like away from it. And I'm thankful for that. But so I spent a good chunk of 2009 to 2014 focused on writing poetry, on reading poetry and things like that. And in 2014, my friend Hassani Harris, who I'd done music with and poetry with, basically had encouraged me to try again. And so from about 2014 to 2016, it was a lot of goofing around, a lot of recording some stuff in the basement of my apartment building. And then 2017, I did my first like real EP. We did that with my guy Hex and a couple, producer from St. Paul named Johnny Abstract, and then a random internet producer. Did a 3-song EP. Went really well, but it was like our first like focused effort with the name OKnice. And then the next year, we got into like really trying to focus on it and make it something serious. In 2018, did a couple singles, the first like full length album, which was a gross learning experience, like in so many ways. 2018 was really the big year that was like, all right, OKnice is a thing. that me and some friends are going to try to make a reality and make something sustainable, with a lot of learning in there.
Yeah, the learning often goes unsaid, but it is very much, at least hopefully happening for each of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, so at least the ones that I could find, some of those 2018 releases, we have Got Dang, which I don't know if that predates like the it just anytime I see something with the word dang and an exclamation point, I just think of the Mac Miller song. But this is obviously a different title. I was like, which one came first? I don't remember. Obviously very different. But we have that song, and then like you're saying, your first real full length, your first you could call it a debut, whatever. That's kind of like music critic brain, like, oh, it's the debut record. Like we don't need to worry about that. But it's called I'm Here But I'm Not. So with those two and maybe any other stuff that's a little bit harder to find online, but the stuff you're working on around that time, just kind of what was your headspace like when you were first really diving into this and making this part of your life and like making OKnice like you're saying a real thing and actually actualizing it. Yeah, what were some of your inspirations and what was kind of your headspace like going into this and after so many years making music and just now putting yourself out there in a whole nother way?
Yeah, God Dang was my first track I did with someone I knew through the internet that was not local and not just like random. No, find a beat and ask for it. It was with my guy Dear God out of Michigan, who I've now done a bunch of stuff with. But he, I met him through like the weird lane that's like not weird, but like the underground lane that's like Bones, Team Sesh, and those like really dark, really like gothy, not like really what I am at all, and I got introduced to that and found him through there. And he'd been wanting to do some kind of lighter stuff, some more like soulful stuff, because he's a big MF Doom fan. And so we connected and made that track. It samples, I won't sample Snitch, but it samples a really good like just indie pop song. And it was just something different than what I'd messed with. And so like the goal there was just like try something I hadn't done before. And it was also like learning to balance. I'd also been doing rap battles the year prior to this. And so it was about trying to find like, how do I do what I do there in a song that people care about, right? How is it like clever wordplay and things like that? So that was basically testing the waters for that. The album was really just, can I do that? Can I make enough songs that are good enough to put together and people enjoy it? And it needs to be together.
Project, yeah.
Like, can I do something cohesive? And that was, and it worked pretty well. And it was a lot of learning as far as like how to cut songs, how to, the engineering process and things like that. And so that was like the biggest learning curve. And I figured like, why not try something way too big to learn about how to not order too much merch. A little bit of everything on that one.
I think anybody that like any band that has specifically gotten CDs has gotten too many CDs, and there is a box in somebody's house of a bunch of CDs that may or may not ever show up at a gig.
Always. I just remember my when we played in bands in like the mid 2010s, just the number of bands that had shirts before they had songs was so wild.
Yeah. We don't need to get into personal feelings about that, but that sigh was very real. It's like, I get it, but also, anyways. So continuing on, you kind of stayed very busy across 2019. Had some collaborative EPs, both at least the ones I saw were Callous and The Winter Tape Volume 1. I think that was the first release of yours that I was at least exposed to, that I was aware of. And then you had your single series, the Can I Bum a Lucy series, which had a lot of features. All these releases are very collaborative. So I guess, talk a little bit about kind of putting out these smaller projects or just singles instead of kind of just, I guess, recovering from putting out an album or a more full-length statement. And just talk a little bit about kind of the collaborative process. Like, why did you want to either do extensive like EP length collaborations with just like one producer, or just getting a bunch of people on a song for a loose single? Like, just talk about kind of what led you to bring so many other folks into the fold for these releases, or I guess if it was even a conscious decision, or if it just kind of happened. Because that's possible.
Kind of a yes, no.
Okay.
So like with Dear God, we both kind of had a shared influence of like, or a love for like hardcore bands and and like older aggressive emo bands. And so with Callous, we basically just want to make an EP that kind of showed some of that influence, because it wasn't anything either of us were trying to do in our individual work, especially like at the time, because I was still like developing what I would call my sound. And so it felt like a collaborative effort was like the best way to like experiment with that a little bit. So like there's a lot of guitars. He does a lot of his like own guitar work on it. And so that was kind of just the whole focus of that was, can we try something a little different? It is like, for all intents and purposes, like very explicitly emo compared to like everything else I've ever done. But it was cool. It was kind of exercise in that, you know, because you never know what people are going to like. The singles, I just wanted to rap, and I didn't want to make anything cohesive.
Yeah.
And so it was like, you had a few people who like, I knew I'd probably never do some stuff with again, or I didn't think I would. And they'd sent me beats. It's like, cool, we're going to handpick these. I'm going to get some features, because I hadn't really done features before, because features are notorious for like not meeting deadlines, self-included. Self-included. And then Winter Tape was very intentional. Winter Tape, my guy Michael out of Texas had been kind of, again, through some of those folks I'd met through that underground lane as Dear God, had been wanting to work together. I didn't really know where our sounds fit, because his were a little bit more trappy, a little bit darker, but I also didn't know what else I wanted to do. And so it just made a lot of sense to like, let's just try something. And yeah, that was the tape like that a lot of people, that was their first exposure to me. That's like the one that Radio K had picked up on. That I didn't even like really push that hard. And so like, you know, it was one of those where like
That's
clearly,
serendipitous. Like, oh, cool.
It worked well, and something there clicked, and I really enjoyed it. Like I was really glad I did it, because it kind of showed me I can do what I do on kind of trappier beats. Yeah, that's probably one of the music things I was most bummed about with COVID, was like we never really got to play that record.
Right.
And then now we have so much new music that kind of working in that record is really tough.
That's a very relatable dilemma, I think. Yeah, continuing from there, so there are a lot of kind of scattered or like some more loose singles across the beginning of the pandemic. I think there's at least one other EP, but just before we get into the record, because that's the meat of the stuff we want to talk about today, your new record, but I did specifically want to ask about the track No Blood, which you re-released in October of last year, and it was a completely re-recorded, remade version of a track you'd done a few years prior, which not only do I think it's a great track, but also that's just a really interesting idea, and I love the idea of artists kind of revisiting their past work like that. So I'm curious, how did that idea first come to you, and what kind of led you to want to do that? And beyond that, are there other songs you either have re-recorded or still want to, and kind of explore that avenue? Just talk a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, I think so. We did No Blood. That was the first track we did after that first full length in 2018. Because I think we dropped it on Halloween, because the beat made me think of Halloween. And then, but at that phase, Hex had been doing the engineering, and had done most of the engineering up until the new record. And originally, before we were like good friends, it was definitely reluctant. Like we needed someone to engineer it. That is not his like trade. It's not what he claims to know. But he did the work to like learn it and make it good enough, basically. And then got way better as we got into like the Social Distance EP and things like that. But then with this one, we'd been still playing it live, and it just always hit live. And I didn't quite ever understand it, because in my head, I'm like, oh, it's way more boring than a lot of our other songs. But it just always hit live. And so when we had that space before the record, and I hadn't really put anything out, it was like, you know, we have a professional engineer now. We have a much better recording space. Like, let's give this song like the love it deserves. And so that's kind of where that came out of. And it felt right, especially before a whole new project that has a whole new sound. But then we've definitely talked about it. The other day I met with our engineer, Andrew. We were having coffee, and we were talking a little bit about there's some other tracks. I think, truthfully, Punks is one I'd like to redo. Okay. Because it's such a fun song. It is like not remotely like my best rapping, but it's such a fun song.
Yeah.
And like, it's another one that just hits well live. And I'm one who, like, if you hear something you like live, it is always a bummer when you find it online and it doesn't hit you the same way.
Or like it's really old, so like, and you can tell because the recording and like everything's a little bit lackluster.
Yup. Yeah, and it's before I was rapping in like my voice. So my voice was way higher because I thought that's what needed to happen. And so just like it's not the right representation for what it is. And I get to talk about bailing on my friends to watch Frasier. So like that's like the most true thesis statement I've ever given about myself.
We'll frame that one. Like this is the definitive summary of being friends with you. Rad. So you very recently put out a new record called Have You Tried Being Happy? It came out on March 1st. So just a couple weeks ago at this point. Actually not just about a couple weeks from now. Just kind of my first impressions. It's a very defiant record, but still very realistic about just kind of yourself and also just a lot of the very relatable kind of struggles of existing and struggling with mental health and working and everything. And specifically, there's like exhaustion and just dealing with everything in the face of like the capitalism, like anchor that's tied to all of us. It spends a lot of time talking about these struggles and difficulties, but it still kind of persists at the end. But it isn't like hitting you over the head with like hopefulness where it's like, don't worry, it'll all be fine. It's still very grounded in the like reflecting the actual situation while still kind of powering through. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what were some of the primary lyrical inspirations, I guess, if you had to like look back and kind of realize, oh, here's a lot of what I was thinking about and writing about when you're first conceptualizing the record. Just what were some of the things that were really fueling you from a lyrical standpoint, specifically going into this record and during the writing stages, especially?
Yeah. Early on, the hook for Split Screen was written pre-pandemic. And that really came from this idea of like, I love music and I would love to do music full time. I have zero desire to like be anything to anybody as like a person. Like I don't want people to necessarily like recognize me when I'm at Target. I don't, and like, I just like, I'm just trying to like live life and do the music thing, which is always really like, people struggle with that, right? Like I used to not even want to tour. Like, let me just put out music and then be this very boring person, like very normal, boring person. And it really came from that of like trying to find that balance of like, I don't think I could be a full-time artist. Like I don't think I have that. I'd get boring. I'd like Eminem myself where I just rap about how I used to have problems. And like,
and how people are mad that my new stuff isn't as good as the old stuff, and that's your whole shtick now.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Then I just starts snake eating its tail. And, and so that was like the original thing. But as time went, like in 2020, was diagnosed bipolar and went through a ton of things in there that were like adjusting and trying to be a better person, because 2019 like saw one of the worst versions of myself since stopping being a scumbag in my early 20s. And so it was basically like, I'm trying really hard and things are getting better and it still just sucks. Right? Like, and I know I'm doing there are days where you're like, I know I'm doing the right thing, taking the right steps, but this is just like still shit sometimes. And like holding those two things, right? Like holding those two things that like my life is improving and it is the good thing. But sometimes, you're like, do I want it to? And
is this worth it? Like, and that's like kind of like the little voice in the back of your head that's like saying, is it really worth trying to, I guess, improve yourself, treat yourself better, like do all these things that you maybe want to do? Yeah, like the balancing the scales, and we have no idea what system of measurement we're using. yeah.
I mean, and then you get on this concept of like gauging like happiness, right? Like having the idea of my life was in one of the best places it had ever been, just in almost every aspect, minus like COVID. But right, that's a known caveat at this point. But like, it's in the best place it had ever been, and there was just still so many days that was just like, I just don't want to be here. Like this is, and what does that mean? And it was kind of, you put it perfectly, of like trying to figure out what that scale is for me. Right. Like, what does it mean to be happy, which is such an existential question, but like, what do I enjoy? And it was really about like simplifying things. And this album was like that process of figuring that out.
Yeah. I think simplifying, that's a really good way of putting it. What was the timeline, I guess, for a lot of these songs? Were a lot of these ideas first kind of germinating pre-pandemic, or was the bulk of it written since 2020? And just kind of talk about like that arc of when this project, the seeds were first planted, and now we have the whatever plant you want the album to be represented by. I'm not going to finish the metaphor.
That's the so the majority was written between probably November 2020 and May 2021. I'd been trying to write it the year prior. And one thing I am like I shamelessly am as a procrastinator. And so if I don't have deadlines, if I don't have like external motivators, it might not ever happen.
Yeah.
And that's just like, and you know, it was one of those where I wanted to take my time, but I was taking a little bit too much. Then with, when I realized I wanted, my friend Andrew to do the engineering, and ultimately we had him do the recording. He's very professional. Like that's his job. And you know, he's a full-time musician and tours and does all this. And so it was like, if we're going to have a timeline, you have to stick to that timeline. And so he said, we start recording, you know, basically we break ground on June 1st. So, you know, get to it. And so I spent almost all of May just cramming in as much writing as I could. Like I'd been writing before that, but that was like really kicked me in. Mostly spring 2021 is when it fully kicked in. And there's some like last minute beats that snuck in that really clicked and worked really well. But that timeline really kicked everything into high gear, which was great because I think a little bit of pressure led to some really good stuff.
Yeah. Kind of connecting back with talking about just how a lot of the themes on the record are very, they're not like, it's not a downer, but they're very, you're kind of soul gazing, I guess. It's very honest. And despite all that, despite all like the very, like the forthcomingness and the groundedness of the record, there's still a lot of humor, which having followed you on Twitter for a while, it makes sense. You're like, once like the first kind of like punchlines hit, you're like, oh, okay, this is what we're kind of in for. We're like, there's going to be some balance here. So I want to ask specifically, what does kind of the role of humor play with your lyrics, with your approach to writing, and kind of that another balancing act of balancing like the kind of clever wordplay and some of the humor. Like one of the funniest moments is the outro on Pleasantville, like the little voiceover. I thought that was really funny. But balancing that and also just the stuff you're actually like wanting to talk about, and the more, I guess, thematic, more heady stuff, if you want to use that word.
Yeah. No. So I want to use like a really good cliche and be like, it helps me cope. But that's not like, that's like a part of it. You know, like a lot of folks, is I'm joking to get through it. But the other thing is like, nobody wants to leave anything feeling bad. Like whether it's a record or a book, or a movie, like with zero light moments, you're kind of like, you're kind of abusing your audience. Right. A little bit. Like you're kind of like getting a little emotionally manipulative there. And like, and the truth is too, like if we're talking about being honest, not every day is bad and heavy, even if it's bad. Right.
Like, there are moments of levity, even among like even a day that's like mostly kind of spent in the darkness. There'll be some moments. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
And I think that's important, right? I think that's important to go along with those themes of like stuff can still be funny. Stuff can still, you know, be like these random thoughts you have amidst all the bad stuff. And that's like a more appropriate portrayal of things other than just bad, you know? There might be a record in my future that's just bad, but then you know
there is a place for those
if
records.
That's what that is, then that's very serious, right? Then you know that I'm being honest there.
That'll be in like all caps, like, hey, this is what you're in for. Brace yourself. This is the kind of album I needed to make. Like, because there is definitely room for those records where, especially like like you're hitting play, you're doing yourself harm, you're in for a bad time, but you got to do it every once in a while, and it's cleansing sometimes, but for the most part, stuff that has at least a little bit of balance is, for me personally, that's appreciated.
When I always talk about the importance of intention, right? If your intent is to make a really dark record that does that, then that, you know, you made that choice. Yeah. The last thing you want to do is like accidentally spiral somebody because you just like didn't think to lighten up a couple songs because you made them at different times.
Yeah. Everything with intent. So I want to talk about, this was something that was mentioned, I think, in some of like the little paragraph on Bandcamp, and also just, I'm guessing, is a very unsurprising source of inspiration. But just growing up in kind of rural Oklahoma in this very sparse, this very different from the cities, this different atmosphere. Um, Talk a little bit about how that has kind of inspired, how that has inspired the lyrics and some of the music, specifically on this record, but also any of the music you've been making since really moving to the cities when operating as OKnice. And yeah, just talk about that specific kind of framework, that lens of inspiration.
Yeah. And that it's a fairly recent thing. I used to have a pretty big issue with where I came from and how I was brought up. Because in a lot of ways it contradicts like my values and what I really believe. But part of the last few years of growing up and working on those things has also been like recognizing the good there, right? And the need for folks to like feel seen, right? Because it's not the kind of place where a lot of people like, at least from when I had last been there and graduated, like there are a lot of people like get to go out into the world, right? And they get chalked up as a lot of things that they're not. And so it was just important to me to like even have those head nods, because I had a few people I'd gone to high school with that like I hadn't talked to in years reach out to say, hey, like a couple of them, this was very wild to be like, my kids like your music. I was like, I don't know if your kid should be listening to it. But you know,
Is your kid okay?
Yeah, like did your kid have a job? You know, and it just became increasingly important to not just completely shut that out, because especially when I think about things like my friend Alonzo and other friends that I specifically that year had lost to like opioids or to meth. Like meth is a huge problem, especially in like small southern towns and southwestern towns. And it's these things where like to not talk about it in a joking way and to not dwell on it, but to just make those head nods to reality and to hopefully like for kids like myself that were there and felt like feels so cheesy, but like just felt like they didn't fit, right? To give that head nod to them, and to hopefully help them avoid some of that same like bitterness that I had and some of those same feelings of conflict, to see that you can hold all those parts of yourself.
Yeah. It'd be so easy to get swallowed by the bitterness of having lived through those experiences, especially as a very young person. I can't even imagine. But it also, yeah, it takes, it makes sense that it had to be a very deliberate decision to kind of address that in your music and include that in the worldview that you were kind of presenting in your lyrics. Because that is part of who, no matter how we feel about it, how we grew up is part of how we are or why we are. It has an uncontrolled influence on us, and that may be a good thing, that may be a bad thing. This is kind of a separate note, but I specifically wanted to talk or ask about, there's the John Lennon quote on Emergency Broadcast. I'm totally outing myself as an idiot sucker who will ask about anything Beatles because I can't change how I am. But specifically, how did you find that sample, or I guess find that original interview? What made you want to put it in the song? How do you think what John is saying and like the quote itself was that a thematic inspiration, at least for that track, among other things? Just talk about that. Yeah.
I'm going to embarrass myself a little bit.
Okay.
I don't know a ton about the Beatles. And I also,
as the most annoying guy on the planet about that, that's okay.
I'm always nervous about that. But no, that was part of the beat when it got sent to me.
Okay.
By Minnesota Cold made that beat. He put in there, immediately offered to like, you want me to take it out? Because he does a lot of his stuff for beat tapes. And so they'll leave samples in and like voiceovers and things like that. And I said, I'll leave it in for now. And then as the album took shape, especially where it sits amongst like Pleasantville and Brick Meets Window, it just fit really well, this idea of like just trying to shatter the American dream, right? And this idea of like everything, just being run by mad people. And it just kind of clicked. It made sense, especially to be that like turning point, because things get fairly darker on the back half, right? I mean, we get into songs about the news and global warming, so it's like that felt, and the track's called Emergency Broadcast, so it felt like a good pivot moment, and especially following the voiceover that we had done for the end of Pleasantville, of like it just felt right, and so we ended up leaving it in. I was thankful that was like, it was one of those where you had to go look up the larger interview just to make sure it wasn't part of something with awful context.
Yeah.
So people are like, oh, wow, he really likes this interview, huh?
That's your favorite John Lennon quote? Okay, buddy.
So I was glad that checked out.
Yeah.
It just added, I'm a big fan of any rap song that has quotes like that. Like any of them. I'm trying to get my guy Jay to put in one to start our set right now. He doesn't know it, but he's got an email waiting on him. Because I'm just such a fan of those and the impact they can have.
Yeah. Oh, that's rad. This is kind of another like little one-off question, but you specifically have in the song Type Blue, there's the line kind of taking a little, very deserved little pot shot at Spotify. Which is, I think, made more selling used books than I do from Spotify or something like that.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about your experience just with streaming, with putting yourself out there in that way, and I guess that whole kind of that side of being a musician, of being an artist, that kind of sucks to think about and talk about sometimes, but is still inseparably like important for, depending on what your goals are. But just talk a little bit about kind of your thoughts and feelings on that, especially since the hot button subject of the day, we got to get all the hot takes.
Yeah. Hopefully I've got some at least semi-sizzling. And that's a particularly interesting one because I've struggled with it a lot the last year, because the lane of hip hop I've started to get kind of run up against and really enjoy being tied to is like this indie rap of like Armand Hammer, like Backwoods Studios and things like that. These people who have full-fledged fan bases on Bandcamp, like people who pay for every release, every physical item, and that's like those are like the top of the line folks. That
There's people that do like digital or CD only for like $30 just from their website, and it's nowhere else. Exactly,
it's down to people even like my level and even a few steps below. Like they do physical copies of everything because it goes, and I felt like I had to do that. And I was like, all right, if I'm going to be basically like respected and accepted in these new circles I'm starting to step into, I got to do that. It just didn't quite click. Like I get good support over there, and when something is well done, like merch, people will go there. But it's also one of those, like, you also have to just like accept where people want to listen. And if my goal is to get as many ears as possible onto stuff, then like you gotta do Spotify. You gotta play that game.
Exactly.
And I'm fortunate too, that comes from a place though of like, I'm fortunate too to not have to depend on music to make my rent. Because I think my tune would be a lot different if it was.
Yeah.
You know? Even in that case though, Open Mike Eagle had a thing recently about when they were telling people to take their stuff off Spotify. And he was like, that pays my bills. He's like, I can't,
that is
he's at
not a feasible option for most people, except for like a lot of the folks that did are like, I mean, folks like Neil Young and Joni Mitchell, like they're fine.
Yeah.
They will be just fine financially and in every way, shape, and form by taking their music off of one streaming platform. But for most folks, whether it's like even someone as relatively big as Open Mike Eagle or someone like operating on a much more like kind of like localized DIY sphere, it's just another important aspect. And the support you can get from it is either paying the bills or at least like one of the best ways to get your stuff out there. So it's like,
that's and I think the actual thing I dislike is this, that you have to do it on every platform.
Yeah.
Like you can't, at least in my world, you can't choose to not do Apple Music or to not do Tidal. Because
I'm not going to do Pandora. Screw them. Take a stance.
That's where I draw the line. Yeah. Pandora, in Napster or Deezer. Was it Deezer's the one that's always on there and no one knows what it is?
I've never met a person who uses Deezer. I'm sure they're out there and they're fine, but I just haven't met you yet.
Yep. And I think it's the only thing I really, truly dislike is that you can't slack on any of it because there's somebody on each one that listens.
And that isn't even a bad thing. Like it almost like sucks where you're like, man, I almost wish there wasn't, because that way it could be like all altruistic and like, no, I'm taking my music off of here. But if there is someone out there that's still someone who's hopefully enjoying the stuff you're putting out there. It's like,
my
don't be mad at that. Like you're too jaded. You're in too deep if that's where you've landed. So this is again back to, there's more of a broad question again, kind of continuing on some of the influences and inspirations. Who are some of like the artists or rappers, I guess, that were specifically influencing your style, whether it's like your approach to lyrics or even just some of your flows and beat selection? Without all like the crazy, like over the top lyricism that he does, a lot of like maybe it's just the voice and the flow reminded me a little bit of Aesop Rock. It doesn't help that he's at least sort of local. The Def Jux, you talk about the CDs and then the name check on they all makes a lot of sense. But that's just to my ears. So I want to ask you, what were some of the artists and people, whether rappers or producers or whoever, that were really in rotation when you were putting this album together?
Yeah, for this record, it was kind of all over the place. I was listening to a lot of Mos Def.
Okay.
I was listening to a lot of Mos Def. And a lot of that came specifically from like flows. Because one thing I've really worked on, because growing up, who I like got a lot of my flows from were Big Pun, Ludacris, Bone Thugs. And it's a lot of smooth, like there are words in every space. Like the beat is there for words to be on in a lot of cases. And I was trying to break that habit a little bit. One, because I was just like dying halfway through shows. And I didn't give myself any room to breathe.
Yeah.
And I'm not clever enough for a lot of stage banter. So you got to keep it moving. And so Mos Def has this really cool control of space. Where like he pauses and his cadences and where it's still smooth though. Because a lot of rappers, especially when you get into some indie rap, especially when you get into like white guys in indie rap, don't have the smoothest flows. And they lean into that, but I knew I could keep that up. I just need to figure out how and still have space to breathe. And Mos Def was a huge one for that. Let's see. The other big ones were John Wayne.
Okay. I've not listened to him in a long time.
Rap Album 2 is probably one of my just like all-time favorite records. And he does this good job. That kind of same level of like, he's extremely honest, but you don't leave just like wrecked. Yeah. Right. And then the other one was there's All the Beautiful Things or All the Brilliant Things by Sky Zoo. Okay. And it's a very just classic sounding rap record, but it doesn't sound dated, which was really important to me, especially on things like Pleasantville or Brick Meets Window that have these way more like classic kind of harken back to 90s rap beats. I don't want it to sound dated. Like I want to like pay homage.
Still sound fresh, but pay homage. Yeah.
And that record handled that really well. Def Jux always plays a role, for sure. Cage is probably hands down my biggest influence, still to this day. And Aesop Rock's in there. It's always funny to me because he's probably more subconsciously in there than I think he is.
Yeah, that's some of it might just be like my ear just like similar like vocal inflection sometimes, and like combining the two, where it's like lyrically you're not really in the same space. Like you're both like doing your own thing, and like he's more about like doing like cartwheels with his words, and you don't really know what it means. Where you're doing like some more storytelling, more personal lyrics, and Aesop does that too, but it's like masked and like 3 layers of like. What does this even mean? You take like 6 listens and you're like, oh, now that kind of, I think that makes sense.
Well, that's what, with Aesop Rock, he's one where he taught me how, so a lot of people learn how to rap a little more monotone off Earl.
Yeah.
Aesop Rock was kind of my guidepost.
Okay.
To how be a little bit more, like don't fake inflection, but it doesn't have to be boring. Because there's a lot of monotone rappers out there. And I just stopped caring after 3 or 4 songs. And I didn't
Especially if it's like
that.
A full length, it's like full 45, 50 minutes. You're like, I'm losing it 5 tracks in. You don't want that.
And he definitely handles that really well. And the Impossible Kid was probably still a pretty big influence because he handles getting older really well without being an Eminem who's really corny without getting older. Like he just a lot of years. It was one of my favorite songs the last few years. Just because talking about the kid at the I think it's the juice spot, maybe talking about his tattoos and like comparing their tattoos and like making him feel old about it. And I was like, oh yeah, no, that like I get that.
Yeah, I'm there.
Oh no, but he just does it in a way that like you don't have to be someone worried about getting older, be like, this is a dope song. And so that record in particular did do a good job of kind of informing my conversation on that stuff.
Yeah. That's I'm glad I wasn't just completely like forcing an influence. I'm like, ooh, I like this artist. My brain's telling me that this connection exists when it actually doesn't, but it does. So yay, I'm not a complete disappointment. So I want to talk a little bit about the featured artists you have, like some of the collaborators you brought onto this project specifically. Def C and Love Ulysses are both people you've worked with before. Gabe from Careful Gaze, and then Sequence. At least maybe you've worked with them before. I just didn't see anything before. So yeah, just talk a little bit about why you want to bring these folks specifically into the fold, how they ended up on their respective tracks. And I guess kind of how that influenced the creation of those songs. Because specifically with Gabe on voicemail, it feels like the song's almost like crafted around. It's like more like like you are both very equally present instead of like, oh, this person's just singing the hook. Which I specifically thought was interesting, but also like the other, like Love Ulysses kind of does that on their song, and then Def C and Sequence just kind of spit.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd love to just hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, let's start with Gabe, because that was one. Gabe and I had been becoming friends the last like 2 years, and kind of true with most of the Careful Gaze folks at this point. But Gabe and I had been hanging out, and I wanted him to feature. But like one of the top things we talked about was I hate rappers who have a feature for a hook simply because they don't want to do the hook themselves, right? It's like forced variation. And that's why I told him, I was like, I don't want this to be that.
Yeah.
And he handled it so well. I sent him a demo of the verses, and yeah, and he just did his thing on all of it and bounced it back, and it was pretty well perfect. That's a thing I've always enjoyed too, is that kind of crossover of genres like that works well. That doesn't feel like anybody, I don't think, is stepping out of their lane, right?
It's more of like a meshing instead of like you're trying to like bang two things against each other and nothing's really happening. It's
on
actually
the
merging.
Dogs Eating Dogs EP, it was almost perfect until Yellow Wolf showed up, and I didn't need him there ever. And that's why
I feel like that's the common case with Yellow Wolf showing up.
Most places.
Like I think he's on like one train, and you're like, dude, what?
That's how family feels at like reunions. But and I just didn't want anyone to feel out of place, and that was handled really well. Love Ulysses, and Darren Sipity I'll put them on anything I ever can. I think they're just two of the best, most original rappers in general, but especially out of this state, that deserve so much love. So that was a no-brainer. Like I knew I want him on there. Darren and I had been in talks about something, we just couldn't quite make it work, so we'll make up for that. But Love Ulysses is just one of the most talented people. And he's easy to work with. We talk a lot, way too much now. And we just kind of share that like passion of rap where we like feed off each other, right? We're always trying to one up each other. And that's why I did 2 verses on that song and he did 1, because I wasn't going to lose.
It was my song. Come on.
And and so that was a no-brainer. Def C, I knew he's been on a huge run.
No, seriously. I just kind of started looking into his stuff. He's the new I think Taper album that's coming out is looking to be really good. He's such a machine. And we had our conversation prior was basically just one of mutual respect and saying, when you want to work, let me know. And that's easy. So we did that on Scumbag. And for this, I had him in mind, but then I knew he was getting ready to go on this big run, and I knew his like room for features was going to be so much less. And so basically it was this is the track. Yeah. Like I'll figure out the details later. Yeah.
Like
I just want to get you on here.
Here's the hook. I think I gave him the hook, and then it was like kind of the vibe. Now just do whatever you're going to do and I'll figure mine out. Cause I always try to rap after Def C does, so I can write a verse that's close. Cause he's probably a top 3 rapper right now. And Sequence saved me. That track was one that I had a few features lined up that fell through, and I was getting really frustrated. And I really love that beat, and I really love my verse. And Sequence is known for turning stuff around fast, so I thought, why not throw it at him? Especially he's from Alabama, so he's like another dude that gets the country stuff. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna try it. He had that thing turn around in like 3 hours. Wow. He's a machine, and he was like, all right, how's this? And it's like a whole verse. I'm like, I'm not gonna tell you no. Yeah. And you're saving me here. And then next day he sent me finals, and we were good. Track that was on the cutting floor was fixed, and it's one of my favorites because his voice is so cool. Yeah, that especially like, I don't know if this was like a conscious thing, but especially kind of like you mentioned, the second half of the record gets a little bit heavier, gets a little bit more insular. I think and having like someone with such a distinct kind of character and voice come in a little bit kind of more on the latter half of the record really kind of gives an additional boost of energy. And it was, I think, a really good
placement for that track and that feature for a myriad of reasons. But yeah, such a distinct style. That's rad. Kind of continuing on that lane with the producers and the beats that you used on this record. How did you connect with a lot of these folks? Obviously with Hex and Dear God, you've worked with them extensively in the past. So I guess kind of a sub question is specifically with those two, how has your musical relationship with them kind of grown over the past like 4 or so years, even before that, just at least since you've been working together with them for OKnice, but also just for the rest of the folks who are on the record. How did you connect with them, and did you give them like a vibe and like a mindset that you're like, hey, here's kind of what I'm trying, here's what I'm imagining. Do you have anything that was into this, or was it kind of vice versa? Just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Overall, yeah.
Yeah. My favorite way of meeting, to explain my meeting with Hex is, there's a guy I went to college with who I saw at a bus stop one day who told me he was still rapping and to come through sometime. And I was like, all right, man.
Cool.
Went to his house. Hex was in the basement making beats. And then now he's like anchored to me for life.
Wow.
And because we just clicked again. He likes really making these classic soulful things. That's like the easiest thing for me to rap on. And so that's kind of a no-brainer. He's one that as long as he wants to work, I'll use his beats for whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And any challenges, we're really close friends. And so he was in the studio, him and our friend Jay, being like, that worked, that didn't,
Mm-hmm.
You can do this better. And so that relationship's really strong. With Dear God, he, 2 years ago, maybe right before pandemic, maybe even a little bit before, he actually is a part of Team Sesh. And so his time got booked up really big. And truthfully, I was like, oh, we're never going to get anything in again. Like, you got people paying you to do stuff. Like,
this stuff is like huge.
But he's such a down to earth dude that like he kept in touch. He's only got one beat on there, but it was one he made specifically for me for this record. He knew what I was trying to do with the record. And it's one of those where you can be really hands off. Like, hey, I'm feeling this. And he doesn't need to send like clips or anything. He's like, I made the beat.
It's done.
And
Here it
you're
is.
like, this is dope. Great. Thank you. And he was still, one I like to bounce stuff off of. And he's got, good insight. I mean, he works with professionals. And so to say, is this a good call, bad call? Whether that's like working on vinyl, things like that. And he's been a great ear for that. Minnesota Cold and Minnesota are both from here. And I knew Sean of Minnesota Cold through rap shows. Great rapper. Knew he made beats, never really paid like a ton of attention because I just thought of him as a really good rapper. And he sent me some just to see, and they were amazing. And I felt like such an idiot for never looking at his beats.
It's almost like the inverse Kanye.
Oh, absolutely. And they slap so hard. And they're so good. And, now he's doing stuff with Muja Messiah, which I'm so glad. Because they just, because he just makes so many beats that I just couldn't even begin to get a third of them done that he sends me. And so, he was one though that as soon as I heard his stuff, it's what was missing for the record. Stuff that hits a little heavier, stuff that's got some slap to it. And so he just would send email after email of so many beats, and I'd have to, pick and choose, and like, make this one longer, do this. So that worked really well. And he knows how I rap really well, so he knew what kind of beats would work. Minnesota, he like a year or two, in 2020. Had posted about getting into making beats, or like he'd started doing it more seriously. And I was like, well, I want to get in on that, before they're $1,000. And we'd worked together, or we'd been on shows together prior. And so we had that relationship, respected each other, hit him up for some beats. He custom made both of those, going off of vibes and like sounds that I wanted. Didn't know what I wanted to do with them when I got them. And then they kind of revealed themselves when record time came out. So
it's always cool to see, like, especially like the local like producers, but also just kind of working with people. You're not limited by the state boundaries. When maybe this is just showing my lack of like my ignorance for like a lot of like local hip hop and stuff, but at least with like other like genres of music, it feels like there isn't that kind of like cross pollination, or I guess it's even a natural limitation. Yeah, where with like getting features and production and like that kind of collaboration, it almost lends itself more to kind of like not immediately like in the same room together.
It
for benefits
sure does.
That.
And that was, I realized too, I left off Zepeda, who had like the second biggest role on the whole. And he's one who I met again through Dear God. He co-produced the Doom Name beat with Dear God.
Yeah.
And we'd been talking for a long time.
I love the hook on that song.
I love that track. And Zepeda and I have a ton of stuff in the channel right now, but he's one who like you tell him a vibe or you tell him I like this sound. He will make 3 beats that night, send clips, and it just works. I mean, he's a workhorse. And he's probably the one I actually had the most communication with on, I need this feeling.
Yeah.
I need to fill in these blanks, and he did it. And yeah, super, super impressive, and glad we've got more on the way. That's why I left you out, Zepeda. It's because we were going to talk more about you in the
It's a segue
future.
into hyping future things up. You're playing the long game. Awesome. Yeah. So that pretty much wraps up the questions I at least have about the record. Again, it's called Have You Tried Being Happy? It's available pretty much everywhere, streaming or Bandcamp purchasing. Got some physical media, right? Remind the folks at home of what that is if they're interested.
Yeah, so we've for this like round of merch, we've got CDs ready now. We've got vinyl that should be here. It's not April yet. It should be here next month or May. How vinyl's going?
That's pretty good for vinyl timing. Yeah,
if they nail it, I mean they're killing it.
Yeah.
And then we also did a limited run of coffee and wrap diner mugs, and then I worked with the local roaster to get my own like brand of coffee made, which was really cool. Called Have You Tried Drinking Coffee? Those are limited. So once those are out, they're out. So
well, that at least is. I'm feeling the pressure personally because maybe it's just because that's an idea we've wanted to do for so long at Ear Coffee with like, I mean, we at least have mugs now, but like the branded coffee, that's such a cool idea. I love it when anybody does that. So I'm probably going to check that out and buy some coffee. Everybody else should too. Just if you're into drinking the bean juice, we got to get the OKnice, the beans, the brew. What else is in the works for you? What else is the future kind of holding for you? I know you just put out the record. Hopefully you're able to take at least a little bit of a breather. You're just kind of basking in the glow of putting out a full project and having put all this time and work into it. But yeah, what else does the future hold? What if you have any shows you want to plug? That now would be a perfect time to do that.
Yeah. A few undesignated tapes for probably later in the year. Getting back working with Michael out of Texas. And then, a few things with Zepeda, a few things with Minnesota Cold. Trying to get my engineer, Andrew, to do one track with me. His entire background's in EDM. Oh. And so he's part of a group called Tyranny and Sound. And so I'm trying to like poke him to step into my world and like see if we can make something cool. But hopefully a lot of features too. I've got a few features on the horizon. One with a band that I'm really excited for.
Yeah, a noted band who we may or may not have talked about already.
I'm excited for that. Hopefully just experiment a little bit. But truthfully, I said to somebody the other day of like, making the record took up 9 months of my time. I'm hoping it'll take up like 3 months of everybody else. Get some breathing room and hopefully get back to playing shows.
Yeah,
knock on wood, we'll get back to that. If you're in Chicago, I've got a show April 1st and another one April 2nd. In Chicago, that'll both be really cool and really different. And then if you're in the Twin Cities, doing a headlining show at 7th Street Entry on April 7th with Love Ulysses is on that as well, as a bunch of other really good folks. But that's going to be a really cool show because that's the first thing, like big thing we'll have done in the new year with shows and things. So I'm excited to get back to it.
Lot of build up for that one specifically. That'll be an exciting time. So I like ending interviews kind of on a similar note. Like I start them on the same, and I just want to ask, what are some of your favorite, like local or I guess underground friends, artists, bands, creatives, just whoever you kind of want to plug now. This kind of goes without saying, but pretty much everybody who features on the record, who has worked on the record that we've already talked about, definitely check out their individual music or their bands. Definitely look into that. But is there anybody else you wanted to shout out and plug? Now would be a perfect time to do that and spread the love.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's always so much pressure.
If you forget even anybody, we will know and we will delete the interview.
I'll record a phone clip and we can edit it in. Darren Sippity is for sure one. He's been a little quieter the last few months, but I know he's got some stuff in the works. He's absolutely worth your time. I don't think this is, they should be probably shouting me out for looks, but Alexis Politz, who I think everyone should know is amazing, but if you don't, go buy artwork. They made the shift to being mostly freelance art, so go buy artwork. And then as far as other people go, Careful Gaze is always at the top of my list. Not local, but kind of lesser known. There's a band out of, I think, Philadelphia called American Beauty. They're a Midwest emo band that I'm obsessed with.
Okay.
I'm absolutely obsessed with. And I think they're amazing. And Cliff Diver out of Oklahoma.
Cliff Diver's so sick.
Those are I think being fans of them was when I started to be like, oh yeah, no, I grew up in Oklahoma. Because they're amazing. They just announced yesterday, signed a Side One dummy.
Oh, Cliff Diver did?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's a great fit.
So they're really phenomenal. But there's so many. But I just, especially what you were saying though with Twin Cities hip hop, I think a lot of people who aren't like directly plugged in miss a lot. And honestly, if you find one person and follow that, like, people also like trail on Spotify.
You actually put in a little bit of the work instead of just relying on recommendations from external sources. Yeah, just start clicking on like the little features and just like see who's featuring on their albums and their tapes and going deeper. Yeah. Cool. Well, that'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and chatting about the record. It's really phenomenal. I'm super excited to have gotten to talk about it. Everybody else, go listen to it, or else we'll know and we'll find you.
I watch those numbers.
Yeah.
I know what cities are playing.
We're going to watch those streaming numbers, and if they do not skyrocket within minutes of this episode coming out, before you could have even listened to the podcast, we will know and we will find you. In all jokes aside, thank you once again. This was a blast.
Thank you.
The Ear Coffee Podcast is a companion to the blog of the same name. If you like this episode, please leave us a rate and review so we can stand out among the other music podcasts. You can follow us at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram @Ear Coffee. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.